the topic of today that I'll be discussing is the new business models for electric vehicles. This talk will present some of the main findings from my research and also some practical findings on the experience of companies involved in the electric vehicle market and how they have been developing. Next slide. So the outline for today's talk, first I'll give a quick overview for those of you who are less familiar with it on the electric vehicle market and its status currently. Then I'll start with the main arguments for my thesis and go into the cases, present all the details of the cases, and then present the comparative framework from my research of the different business models and how well they did in essence. Because at the end of 3 years of research, there is some sort of element of being able to judge how well certain business models did versus others. And I'll conclude with the significance of these findings, both for practitioners and for what we've learned on business models and how business models are actually developed and formulated in the context of emerging technology ecosystems. So to start, this graph just basically shows an overview of the sales trends and the market shares for electric cars. It's for all cars that are plug-in, so it could be plug-in hybrids or plug-in pure electric battery vehicles in a number of countries to give you an idea of which are the biggest markets. So clearly, US dominates in terms of overall sales numbers. Japan has been a very strong market, and China, even though EVs, plug-in electrics, represent a very small share of overall car sales in China, it is still starting to become an important market in terms of vehicles sold. So what you can see is an increasing trend from between 2011, where we were at less than 50,000 vehicles globally. The market has grown to about 300,000 vehicles in 2014. And this is sales per year, of course. So this means, given the market shares, we're still speaking of sort of fractions of overall car sales for this market. So it's still at the pre-early adopter phase. So it's before you even reach that 2.5% of early adopters in the sort of typical diffusion S-curve pattern that electric vehicles are still sort of in. So this the next slide. Slide 3, business model innovation and diffusion. So if you look at the left tail of this S-curve, essentially it's been lasting in the electric car market from 2007 up until now, where we're finally starting to move into the early adopter phase. And what I argue in my thesis is that this is the time when business model innovation plays a key role to support the industry growth. Even though the technology has been sort of inferior, there are lots of barriers to adoption, such as lack of infrastructure, limited driving range of the batteries, high costs of the vehicle, and limited knowledge of consumers, so they're not very familiar with the technology. So despite all these inferior performance packages, electric cars are still going to make it through the early stage of the market and through the chasm of adoption due to the innovation in business models. Next slide. Then the second main argument of this thesis had to do with extending the perspective on business models to the surrounding ecosystem. So this is a more academic contribution, but essentially that circle, the reflexivity process that you see sort of sits between the business model and its surrounding ecosystem, and sort of labels out 5 steps that companies should go through when they're trying to design a business model and readapt it continually to the ecosystem around them that's changing. Next slide. So I'll go straight into the case studies at the moment. So there are two that have to do with companies developing charging system solutions. One of them is Better Place, that developed the battery swapping concept. There's a picture of an example battery swapping station. You might have heard of this company. And another sort of competing vision, if you will, for the development of a charging system that meets people's needs is the one proposed by TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company, in Japan, based on the CHAdeMO standard. So CHAdeMO is a standard for fast charging. That means charge on the go. Then, so those two are charging system business models, and on the other side, there were different types of business model innovations, which are integrated mobility as a service companies. So companies that decided to provide the end user service of driving with electric vehicles, as opposed to just sell the car traditionally as a manufacturer would. So the top one is Moveabout in Norway, a small company providing car sharing for corporate companies. And Autolib in Paris, a company that's providing public car sharing services in the city. The cases are based on interviews, so there's a sort of breakdown between the different countries and types of companies, but I essentially tried to capture the points of view of all of the companies involved in the value chain for electric vehicles. So everything from OEMs and battery manufacturers all the way to sort of government, integrated mobility as a service providers, as we've seen, energy providers, etc. And the case studies represent essentially some of the most extreme approaches to innovative business models in the early days of the market, and they represent diverse international contexts. So the first case is battery swapping business model by Better Place. It was very well intended to sort of set up a network of charging infrastructure for consumers, and it solved sort of the long charging times because a battery could be swapped out in about 4 minutes in these stations, and people don't have to own their battery, which is the most expensive component of the car. They can just lease it from this company, Better Place. So unfortunately, this was an example of a business model that sort of worked well in theory, but faced a number of problems in reality that led to basically the bankruptcy of the company after hundreds of millions of dollars were invested in it in the early stages. And one of the major issues was that, first of all, it was a complex system that cost a lot, so each charging station cost about $1 million. It also required the company to store lots of batteries, so more than one battery per car, which of course is capex intensive, and when you don't have many cars on the road, it's difficult to start out with a very capital intensive solution such as this. But then there were also problems with ecosystem compatibility, in that Better Place really wanted to have the sort of advantage in the overall market and be the central company that links consumers and car manufacturers. But the car manufacturers were not willing to make batteries and cars, essentially, that were compatible with this swapping system. So that was the main one where the ecosystem played a really important role in deciding the fate of the company. Then the second case is Tokyo Electric Power Company that developed the CHAdeMO fast charging standard. So fast charging solves, one of the same problems as battery swapping, which is the long charging time. It allows to charge in about 20 minutes from a 100-mile range vehicle. And so it's essentially a standard, and the way TEPCO organized the development of the standard was to create an association with many hundreds of industry players in the electric vehicle ecosystem. So they gathered together members like Nissan, like all of the main car companies, all of the main electricity companies, and some other infrastructure and integrated service solutions companies to agree on a joint standard and to agree to deploy it. Now, TEPCO definitely also faced some ecosystem barriers to its development. The most important one being that according to them, the German car manufacturers were not willing to participate in this Japanese standard development. They wanted to develop a standard of their own for German cars. So for a long time, there's been a competing fast charging standard called Combo in Europe that hasn't been. It's not as close to being ready technically as the TEPCO one, but has been sort of halting the deployment of the TEPCO one. However, good news, the most recent European legislation has decided to support multi-standard charging stations, which will have the effect of having the CHAdeMO charger standards right next to the German manufacturing fast charging standards, next to slow charging, etc. So that people in one charging station will have sort of 4 different options to make sure that these stations that are essentially national infrastructure will be compatible with as many vehicles as possible that are out there on the roads. Then third case was Autolib in Paris, that sort of as a subsidiary of a large industrial conglomerate called Bolloré, and they had technical capabilities that they wanted to deploy and explore through the Autolib project that was commissioned by the city of Paris. So at the moment, the way it works, if you've been to Paris recently, they're definitely there and driving around. There's hundreds of stations all around the city and its suburbs. These little electric cars, and the way this is organized is so people pay a flat fee. It's a membership service, and everything is included. So there's a charging fuel, of course, parking. You only pay based on how much time you use the car. And the way it's organized is fully vertically integrated service, where this company was able to provide everything from sort of the customer services and billing solutions to the deployment of the charging network to the manufacturing of the vehicle and the battery itself. So that's why they won the service. And what they were aiming to do is not just sort of develop a sustainable business based on public car sharing, but it was to strategically develop their competencies inside markets, so particularly the energy storage market for the grid. So they were using this as a field test for their battery technology, and they are also using it as a sort of starting basis to go sell their car, the electric car, on private markets, or to go to other cities in the world and provide consulting services on how to develop such a service. Then the fourth case, Move About in Norway, was founded as a spin-out of Think, which was a very early on electric car manufacturer that since went bankrupt. This company was founded by some entrepreneurs with their own savings, and it has developed a customer base in Oslo essentially, but in a few other European cities, but it has stayed quite small. It's similar to Autolib, it's all integrated service provided to the clients. So I thought in my research, the point was, how do we compare such business models with each other? So if you look at this diagram, essentially there are 12 or 11 dimensions of comparison of what a business model should try to achieve for electric vehicles. So everything on the right side is solving customer problems, and everything on the left side, to make it simple, is developing business opportunities from the firm's perspective and from the ecosystem's perspective. So that led to these diagrams to give you an idea, and this helps understand sort of where are the strengths of these different business models. So, for example, if you look at the lower right-hand corner, the Autolib public car sharing service seems to be very strong in addressing all of the cost issues for consumers. Whereas, for example, the fast charging one is good in terms of enabling technology innovation in the ecosystem because it's very flexible. It allows lots of different companies to design their own technologies, design the vehicles, design charging networks, create their own business models while agreeing on just this common standard for charging. So that the second part of the thesis did have to do with the reflexivity process and how companies capture in information, changing information from the ecosystem surrounding them into their business model design process. So it's not just a matter about sitting down, coming up with a list of barriers to customer adoption that need to be solved and ways that you're going to create and capture value. It's also about being able to factor in new information in the rapidly changing ecosystem. So for that, I presented sort of 5 steps. I don't think we'll have time to go through them in detail. But so there are really sort of 4 pieces here, but the business model itself, from the firm's perspective, the ecosystem and how it's developing, and the reflexivity process that links the two. So this is looking just at the part that's the firm's business model. Parts of that are how well does it do at solving barriers to adoption? Does it do it through technology? And if it does do it through technology, then it's going to take a long time to perfect the technology, whereas sometimes business models themselves, just changing them, can give sort of the low-hanging fruit solutions and help early-stage adoption. Does the business model factor in service revenues? Does it help develop customer behavior? So is it a leader of change in customer behavior, or does it treat the market as it is and not expecting it to change? For example, Toyota was an example of that, where they said, customers aren't ready for these cars. They haven't expressed demand for these cars, so we are going to make hybrids, non-rechargeable hybrids, because these are cars that respond to what people actually want in the market, as opposed to a company like Nissan, whose view was, we are sure that maybe not right now, but as soon as the technology is ready, as soon as stars align, there will be demand for electric cars, and we want to be a front runner in this market. And so if you just look at the outcome, it's hard to sort of find a relationship between how well the business model did and how well the company did, which is the right-hand column, and how well they performed in each of these elements of business model design. Now, looking at how well they did on the different steps in reflexivity, definitely the company that has the most reds, that was not really willing to make a business model compatible with others' business models, and that wasn't able to experiment, did less well than other companies. So what's happening at the moment? Of course, Better Place is dead. CHAdeMO, the standard is in use in thousands of chargers, and it's continuing its expansion worldwide. Autolib is still pursuing its avenues for growth. The parent company, Bolloré, has been doing very, very well in terms of revenues and share price. And MoveAbout is sort of stagnating, I would say stable. Okay, so this is what I'm saying here. But battery swapping, interestingly, as a concept, as a business model, is not dead, and it's growing in some niche markets. So in certain, such as government fleets in China, so if you have a postal service, for example, and all the vehicles are the same, it makes sense to use battery swapping. There's also a startup company in Munich that's developing little swappable sort of scooter batteries. So, so perhaps the Better Place just had specific issues to the way it was dealing with the ecosystem that made it fail. This is some news from TEPCO, who said we'll strive to collaborate with the Combo Group in the form of multi-standard chargers rather than fight the standards war in order to accelerate the overall EV adoption for the best interests of today and tomorrow's EV drivers. So this is really speaking to that shared vision for everyone's interest in the ecosystem. Then, as I said, it was really doing well. So, future research, it would be great to sort of establish more clearly a link between firm success and the business models they adopted or invented. And I would just say EVs are an interesting context to study other sorts of issues, such as the coevolution of business model trends. So maybe part of the answer is not electric vehicles themselves, but electric vehicles as part of shared self-driving urban systems of vehicles. And these sorts of issues need to be captured in new sorts of streams of research. So with that, I think I'm a bit over time. Apologies. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'd be happy to hear your questions and comments.